Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful. Let me get my notes. Okay.
You want to show the slide?
Sorry?
Slides now, or?
Oh, no, we don't have to do it. You can put them up at you whenever. I'm just, I'll let you know exactly when we need to get into them. But let's see. So last time, well, number one, anything to share from anybody? Anyone online? Anything, any incidents or any events or something you wanted to bring up or discuss?
I have something.
Anything that we didn't understand from last time, or that was either
There is, I think, online participant.
Yeah,
want to speak.
please.
Just,
Yeah, I just curious. Most of the time, well, whether in the Al Quran or others, they mention about man. So, well, I'm not jealous, but I just wondering, in Arabic, does man mean like does man including women as well? So just curious, why mention man only, not human?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think it's a good question in terms of how our society is now progressing, the words that we're using. It's more a function of language rather than the religion. So most languages, if you go back before maybe 50, 60 years, the default word that's used for humans is often the male, the male description. So when you say in the older books, probably in the King James Version, for example, if you see, and God said to man, both genders are included automatically. That's just the function of the language. I think because of the way our society is progressing, because of the way the usage has now become, I think the Qurans that are coming out now, you see more, in English at least, either they talk about people or persons or men and women or humans, etc. But I think in the past, it was just understood that whenever you say mankind or man, it includes the women. Now, in the Arabic, a lot of times when you're hearing man, it's not actually rijal, it's actually insan. So rijal is the plural of male. Like in Arabic, for example, rajul is a man. Rijal is the plural form of many men. Okay. The plural form for women is nisa. And nisa is actually one of the chapters in the Quran. I think it's the fourth chapter, maybe. Yeah, the fourth chapter is called Nisa. And so there are places in the Quran where God will address, men and women, but most of the times he's just referring to an-nas or insan. So insan is a singular human being. It's called insan, I-N-S-A-N, insan. That's non-gendered. And the plural of that is an-nas, N-A-S. And so the last chapter, for example, is قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. And so those three verses are talking about the God of mankind, the master of mankind. And there's different translations, but I think so language will change according to what society is, dictates as what's common usage. But I think in the past, and especially a lot of the translations that I have of the Quran, when they're translating insan into English, when they say like God said to man, right now it's like a remnant of a more poetic style. That's what I've noticed. God said to mankind, right? Like what did Neil Armstrong say when he got onto the moon? He said, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Now I'm saying that would never happen now, right? I mean, if there was an astronaut, he would have to say humankind or humanity, which, so there's no preference for males versus females, no preference of a man over a woman. God is not a man. The angels are not men. It's just when you're looking at in Arabic, like in English also, and I'm not going to keep belaboring the point, but in English, we have it, right? You have he, she, it. Most languages don't have that. They only have he or she. So sometimes you'll see, I remember when some Arabs would come from overseas and they were new into English, they would look at a chair and say like he, like that, like, you know, him, get him, you know, it's like, instead of get it, because they don't have that concept. So, and then they have genders, right? So in Arabic, similar to like French and Italian and all the other languages, most objects have male or female, right? It's called genitive, right? They have gendered things. So you say, like, or even in my language in Urdu, a kursi, the chair takes a female, right? And there are, so there's a lot of things like that. Like I think so that's just, I keep going. I'm gonna stop here. Hopefully that answers the question. If you have a follow-up, you know, you can comment or you can just unmute and let me know if that answered the question. But I think there's no, from a theological standpoint, there is absolutely no preference for males, and there's generally God is addressing insan in the Arabic, so it's a non-gendered term.
So yeah, I think the translation is saying that, but not really in the Arabic language, right? I mean, like man, when I saw man, it's translation of the Arabic language, but it doesn't mean that intention only for man. That's what I catch from your explanation.
Partly what I'm saying. I think so for this question, you really have to understand both languages. And what I'm saying is, if you look at the definition in Arabic, yes, it depends on the verse that you're reading. But if the word is insan, that does not mean like a man. It does not mean male. It means men and women. Okay. What I'm saying is, in English, when the translator is translating into English, he's translating or she's translating the word insan into English, they can use man. Now, if you look up the definition of man in English, it will say men and women. Okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying even in English, they're not trying to translate it in a way to exclude women. They're translating, if they say mankind or they say God spoke to man, the capital man does not mean a singular male. It means men and women in English. So I'm sort of defending the English language. So you have to understand the usage in English. That's what it is. So yeah. It's just a matter of language, I think. And that's what I'm saying. My other discussion was that in English, I think that will stop happening. Eventually, I think instead of man, they will start using humankind or humans.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anything else from anyone else? Any thoughts from last time? I have a mini quiz. Let's see, where is this? We can see off the slides for a second. This is for online and for the people here. I'm just going to do a little review of what we talked about last time. Can someone tell me what fitra means? What is fitra? We talked about it quite a bit last time. It's a perfect definition, actually. A natural disposition to believe, primary nature of a person, but anything that's an innate, natural belief in the monotheistic concept of God. Okay, what did God ask every human being before their birth? If anything.
Am I your Lord?
Close. So who is your Lord?
Oh, yeah.
Something very similar. So the Arabic was Alastu bi Rabbikum. Am I not your Lord? Okay. So, I mean, the same thing, but it's the concept of asking human beings before even their birth. So that's part of where we come from, this concept of having fitra. Now, what was the answer?
Okay.
So I'll just give you the answer, and then we'll go to the next question. The answer was, you are indeed, we so testify. So God tells us both what he said, what he asked us, what we said in our I guess, dunyawi state. And then he also said, lest you say on the day of judgment that I was never told about this. Now, similar to that is a more involved question. We talked about this. What happens to people who are raised in pre-Muhammadan communities, or communities where, and we talked about, for example, the Mayans or the Aztecs or the Incas, these type of people. What happens to those type of people? And we've discussed various positions. Anyone online or here want to talk about that a little bit?
God is just, so like we can't judge them on the fact that they didn't know, they didn't have the exposure.
That's a really good answer. I think beginning with God's justice is like the right way to approach that question, because we know he's just, right? So whatever the explanation is, that has to be paramount, that his justice has to prevail, right? Assalamu alaikum. And so one of the positions that we discussed was this concept of that there was one group of scholars that believes that your fitra, your innate disposition, will guide you to a single God. And so therefore you would be responsible for believing in the correct thing, not, of course, how to pray or fasting in the month of Ramadan, none of that, but this core belief of a single God, that you would naturally be disposed to it and you'd be responsible for that. But we said that the majority position, a lot of the scholars said, is you would not be responsible, because unless and this was something that one of the participants had said, was unless one of the prophets, the previous prophets that we were told about, had come to that community specifically, right? Or this person was able to find, a scripture or something, they would not be responsible, because the Prophet ﷺ has said in other places that a child is born a Muslim, like is on the fitra, but then they are made to be something else. And so scholars took from that, well, if they're made to be something else, then they're not responsible, unless the prophetic message came to them, or, the Jesus's actual message came to them, etc. And then there was this other position that I don't think I mentioned last time, is this concept that if you're shown the religion badly, right? So meaning, if you're raised somewhere and there are Muslims, let's just say in the neighboring town, and they do something really horrible, right? And you get a really bad view of what the religion was, and you never were able to then see the correct message, right? The scholars have actually talked about this, that even that God can forgive you, and they might punish the people that actually were the Muslims that did something bad. Sorry? Coptic.
Every ID dollar and every time like an Egyptian Christian, I don't even want to engage in the conversation with that Christian. Sorry that you have such a terrible view. I don't know how to change it.
So I've also had dealings with so the point was, she mentioned Coptic Christians. So a lot of some minorities in Muslim lands will have a lot of complaints often about the way they're treated by that majority Muslim community, right? I haven't seen it that much, but it does happen. And so if they're getting a bad view of the religion based on, again, backing up, there can be a person that gets a Muslim to do something bad to them, right? And like Islam sucks, right? But then there's 50 other Muslims that are being kind to them, and they won't look at that. That's something that God will have to obviously judge between. But there is this concept that, yeah, if you're a young person and a Muslim treats you very badly, and then that's all you were able to see, that God will also judge between that. Now, we also talked about this concept, which we'll talk about today a little bit more. And I'm actually not sure if I mentioned it last time, but did I talk about what a Hanif is?
Sorry, Brian, also you saw some of the comments online as well from Mr. Paula.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, that's a nice way to sum up what we were talking about. The scholarship is divided in two options in it. Are that number one, they don't know, weren't exposed, or two, somehow had to know and are held accountable. Yeah, so that, I think that is the correct concept. So we were also talking about, in this same context, this concept of a Hanif. You remember what that was? What a Hanif was? So a Hanif is a monotheist. They generally talk about monotheists, believers in one God before the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And so because we're going to talk about the biography today, a brief biography, we'll talk about these people. And we'll talk about them today, but one of the names is like Waraqa, Waraqa, Waraqa. It was the uncle of the Prophet's wife. He was a Hanif. There was another one named Zayd ibn Amr, Zayd bin Amr, Amr. And so their stories are very interesting, and because their sons or their children would talk about them. And then of course the Prophet's family themselves, mother and father, they would have been Hanifs. They're people who believed in the monotheistic God, rejecting the polytheistic beliefs of their people. And so they would be called Hanifs. Can a prophet appear after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Well, why not?
That he's the last one.
Exactly. There's a particular verse that mentions this. It's called the Khatam an-Nabiyyin. Okay, and it's Muhammad is not the father of any man among you, but rather he is the messenger of Allah and the final seal upon the line of the prophets. And it was chapter 33, verse 40. We mentioned it last time. And then I have a last question. The Quran described, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's a final seal.
So this goes back to the English Arabic issue I was having before, but it's khatam. They're trying to translate the word khatam an-Nabiyyin. Like in our language, we have in Urdu we say khatam. It means end, right? Like this is finished. It's khatam. But I think a seal in English, I'd have to look up what the older definitions are. But it's kind of like you're putting a cap on it, right? I suppose. But I have to get a better understanding of what the English word is. But khatam is the actual word. Khatam means like the end of the line.
And like in Christianity, you talk about the seal, like breaking the seals, and like the chapter. Sorry, yeah, just in like Christianity, talk about breaking the seals and whatever the last chapter, the end of days chapter. I forget the name of it. Yeah, that's why I just thought it was interesting. But it makes sense if it's just language translation.
Well, I'm wondering actually, that's a very interesting point, because a lot of the, well, not a lot, but some of the translations, if they're being done by, like Marmaduke Pickthall is one of the more famous translators. He's coming from a Christian background. Or Muhammad Asad's translation, I think he's coming from a Jewish background. I'm wondering if they're bringing in some of these concepts, like, so because Marmaduke Pickthall's translation is a very early one. And what I've noticed is a lot of translators will use the earliest ones and kind of use them as, supplements, or they'll use them as like the foundation, and they'll start adding on to what they think. So if he would be bringing in an English, like a concept from Christianity, like the seal, like, and seal in Christianity has like this very rich tradition of how it's defined, that maybe what's happening. Because I know in some of the translations that I was reading, when Allah Ta'ala mentions the Injil of Isa alayhi salam, like Injil is what's called what was revealed to Jesus, the translator translated as the gospel of Jesus. And so my Christian friend who had become Muslim was really upset at that. And he's like, because he said the gospels are not what was revealed to Jesus. There's stuff that's been added, there's stuff that we don't know what's correct. So his point was, that's not a good translation. And now again, that's just one person with their view. Now, but I thought it was an interesting concept when someone who's not from the Christian tradition is translating it and says, let's just put gospel here. And for Zabur, let's put the Psalms. And for the Torah, let's put the Torah. It's like, maybe you're not thinking about how that's being read by Christians or Jews, because when they come to you, they're like, well, you have to believe in the Bible. And we're like, well, no. we're believing in whatever was revealed to Jesus. And they'll say, well, but that it says gospel in your Quran, right? So that again, it goes back to translation. So I think even khatam, I'm going to write that down because I'm going to look it up what's been, how it's been translated. Khatab al-Nabiyyin. It's a good question. And how it's looked at in the Christian books. Any other thoughts? So the last question I had was, the Quran describes Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a mercy to what? Mankind, all believers,
God.
universe,
Mankind.
God,
Oh, everything.
everything.
People.
So it's the
All of
rahmatan lil
creation?
alameen. Alameen is translated as the worlds or universes, so it's extremely broad. So it's even beyond just humanity. And this concept that we had talked about last time was that he even came as a mercy to, you know, the environment, the animals, everything. Any thoughts on anything else we discussed last time? I'm going to get into the slides if not, or any other issues. Anything online? The world, yeah. Exactly. So something very broad. And so that answer by Paula, the world, just make it plural, right? And then that's similar to what's Alameen is, the worlds. Let's go into the first slide after this. So I just wanted to give we were talking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think we ended on last time just about the love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I wanted to mention this. Let me see. Hold on one second. I want to blow this up a little bit. Okay. So this is a poem. So Hassan bin Thabit was known as the poet of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hassan's most well-known poem reads, and it's nice in Arabic. I'm having a hard time seeing it right now, but it's wa ahsanu minka lam. I can't even see it here. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let's see, 1 sec. I'm sorry about this.
You can go closer to the monitor.
Yeah, let me just go close to the monitor. Can I? Yeah. Should I take this with me, or should I? Is this fine here? Pick it up from there. Okay. So the Arabic says, "Wa ahsanu minka lam tara." Oh no, the Arabic's all messed up too. Sorry. It's on there too. Give me 1 second. Let me just. I want to say the Arabic's really nice. Yeah. So I'll try to correct the Arabic on the slide. I think I messed it up by working on it too much. Let's see. Do you have it? Yeah, but pass it because I messed it up on my slides too. Do you want to read it? No, go ahead if you want to. Come over here. Yeah, come over here and read. Let's recite it.
وأحسن منك لم تر قط عيني وأجمل منك لم تلد وأحسن منك لم تر قط عيني وأجمل منك لم تلد النساء خلقت مبرأة من كل عيب كأنك قد خلقت كما تشاء. I think that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really nice. So it's the Arabic is really beautiful, and I kind of wanted to put it up there, but it's the poet says, "My eyes have not seen one more handsome than you. No woman gave birth to one more beautiful than you. You were created without any weakness or blemish, as if you had been created as you had wished to be created." So part of what I wanted to mention was that there was another hadith that I had seen where, let me get the notes on that. There was a hadith by a scholar named Jabir ibn Sumarra, and he said, I saw Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam on a cloudless night, and he was wearing a red suit of clothes. So I started looking at him as well as the moon, for he is indeed more beautiful in my opinion than the moon. And he kind of looked at the moon, he looked back at the Prophet, looked at the moon. And so this idea that the Prophet is described as the full moon, and it comes from this idea also that, if God is light, if he's the one that provides the light, the Prophet ﷺ is the one that reflects the light to us, right? Or on a journey in the middle of the desert, right, on a full moon, you can find your way. And so you're stepping through the rocks and the crags and the crevices and all these difficulties. There may be animals, but he is the full moon on that. As you walk through your life, as you're walking through these things, the Prophet provides that light of God. He shows you where to walk and where to go. And the other part of this is that the Arabs, and we'll talk a little bit about this more when we get into the biography, is that they were a culture of poets. That's one of the things, you remember one of the first classes we were talking about, the Prophet ﷺ is described as Nabi al-Umayyi. Nabi is a messenger of God. And we'll talk about Nabi and Rasul later on when we talk about the 6 pillars of Iman. But Nabi al-Umayyi, Nabi is the Prophet, and Umayyi, I had used the word illiterate, right? And more classical English scholars have used the word unlettered. And so I had, after the class, I'd gone and seen, have I really disrespected the Prophet by saying illiterate? But it's both. You can use, Lane's lexicon used the definition of actually illiterate. But most English translation, I think, is out of respect for some reason. They seem to like unlettered better. But what I found interesting is Umayyi, and unlettered, was actually the word that the Jews had given to the Arabs, because the Jews considered themselves, like they knew they were like cousins, in some way, like they're both from Abraham, but they knew they were the people of scriptures. They were the people who could read and write. And so they used to call the Arabs the unlettered people, Umayyi, and that comes from Does anyone know what means? Mother. So it's like, you are as your mother bore you, unlettered. So the Prophet was considered the Nabi al-Umayyi, meaning he's the unlettered Prophet. He did not know how to read and write. But despite that, the culture of poetry was huge amongst the Arabs. Now, the Prophet ﷺ himself was not a poet, right? He did not know, he wasn't, I don't know, I shouldn't say so far that he wasn't good, but it's like he wasn't known for that. He couldn't really write poetry. There were other companions like Umar al-Khattab, he was known as a poet. And this companion, Hassan bin Thabit, is also known, as a poet. So you see a lot of this where people are talking about the Prophet, but I kind of wanted to start the class with this idea of how much his people loved him and how much they just kind of adored how he was and how he treated them. Let's move to the next slide. So we talked about the first part of the Shahada. We talked about the natural disposition to believe, and we've done our review now. So today we're just going to talk about the second part of the Shahada, and just, I think we had mentioned some things about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I think, and so we'll move into sorry, give me a second. Yeah, we'll move into the biography. If you go to the next slide. And then we talked about this slide. So again, we're going to be concentrating on I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Let's go to the next slide. And so just to give you an overview of what we're going to discuss now, the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, and let me just tell you about this book. If you may have seen this book. It's Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources. It's by Martin Lings. It's considered to be one of the best books in English. It's written very well. It's very engaging. It's a beautiful book. When I used to teach the kids biography on Sunday school, I used to use this. It's a really beautiful book. But just briefly what I'm going to cover: his birth. We're going to, and these are the actual divisions in the book. Okay, it's very brief in the book, and I will try to keep it brief as well. But we'll talk a little bit what I think are just important things that we should know about his life. So his birth, we're going to talk about what he came into. What was the world like when he was born? Right? What were the circumstances of his birth? What was around him? What was he facing as he was growing up? Now, his life and upbringing, that's an interesting portion of his life, because that's all pre-revelation, right? What age was the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he got the revelation? 40 years old, right? So imagine all those years without revelation, without any sort of contact from, the supernatural being Allah. And so it's just interesting to see what his life was like before that, what he was looked at, how he was seen. And then we actually get into the revelation comes, and then he's been told about his mission, right? So what was God asking of him? And even the grander question is, from a theological perspective, what does he ask of any prophet, right? What is their mission? Beginnings, we'll talk at the beginnings of his mission. We'll talk about, this is more, his life is often divided into two parts, right? What are the two cities? So the Meccan phase of his life and the Medinan phase of his life. Now, he's the same person, of course, right? But they're so different in their natures. And so we'll talk a little bit about them. Mecca, it's persecution of the early Muslim community, but it's also spiritual refinement, right? That's what we'll notice. They can't engage their detractors in any way. So you see a lot of he's refining these people spiritually, slowly. And then we go into the migration, which is a huge part, right? When they go to actually the city of Medina, it's a pivotal moment in Islamic history, because the first time the Prophet now is a ruler of a community, and the laws of the Sharia and all these things start to become real. And then his efforts to spread Islam, we'll see, then it goes out to, okay, fine, the Arabs are accepting Islam. Now his mission is beyond that, right? I mean, imagine he has to reach people in Indonesia, he has to reach people in Pakistan, he has to reach people in Americas. And so we'll start seeing what his efforts are, what he's looking out to. And then his passing, we'll talk about the circumstances of his passing, on his going back to his Lord, but also what it means for the community, right? What it means to have this link to God and this perfect human being that you've come to adore leave the earth, and now he's kind of left you all alone to do God's business, I guess, in that sense, right? So we'll talk a little bit about those questions. So we will try to keep it brief, but if you have additions, if you have questions, if you have, some comments you want to make, please do. Of course, we want to keep this as much of a discussion as possible. Anything else on that before we begin? I'm going to start talking about his birth. Let's go to the next slide.
Could Brother Rehan repeat the title of the book and the author?
Of course. So it's Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources, and it's by an author named Martin Lings. Martin Lings is Martin.
Mm-hmm.
His last name is Lings. And what I'm going to do after class, for all the people, if you're on the WhatsApp group, Cambridge Muslim College is headed by a great scholar. He's a convert from England. His original name, I think, was T.J. Winter, and he chose the name Abdul Hakim Murad. But he has translated a lot of books, but he's head of the Cambridge Islamic College, or Cambridge Muslim College, I think it is. They have a recommended reading list, and they have a whole page on shahadas. So I'm going to share that with the brothers, and they can share that later. And this book will be on that. And so you'll see that. I think they have a link to goodreads.com. And so this book will come on there. So we'll share this after the class.
Okay. Thank you.
We're okay? Okay. So let's go to I don't know what slide this is, slide 6. the Prophet Muhammad, his birth. Perfect. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, and when they can get it up, I'll just keep talking. Really to understand, number one, the geography of Arabia is very interesting in that it's sort of connects 3 continents, right? If you look at the world map, you have the Arabian Peninsula, sort of Africa is connected to it, Asia is connected to it on this side, and then, if you talk about Europe or Western Asia, Western Eurasia is connected to it. So it's really interesting because it's sort of away from everything. In the sense, if you're talking about the Fertile Crescent, you're talking about where people are migrating through, you have to go south and actually get into the peninsula, but it's right on the edge of where people are moving to and from. And the earliest civilizations all developed there. So understanding that it's sort of right, why God chose it as a place where the Kaaba is, where so many of the prophets are coming, is just an interesting, if you look at it from the perspective of the geography of it. Now, Arabia itself, what he's being born into, the thing you have to understand is the remnants of the Abrahamic religion are there, right? The people that are living in Mecca, right, they revere the Kaaba, but it's surrounded with all these idols. So they believe in Allah, they believe in God, but they have other demigods or whatever it is. They have many other gods that they believe in and that they worship. And that's still, if you look at some of the more polytheistic religions, like even Hinduism, what's interesting is if you go from city to city, they will have a particular god that they worship. And I didn't realize that. When I used to think about Hinduism, I just thought they worshiped all the gods, but people will be devotees of a certain god, right? There'll be devotees of Shiva, there'll be devotees of Vishnu or things like that. So the Arabs were like that in a way. They had certain gods that they visited. There were statues of different gods in the desert somewhere that they would go to and make a pilgrimage. But Mecca, where he's being born into, where the Kaaba is, all of Arabia and even parts of East Africa see this as a place of pilgrimage. Okay, so what you have is you have a lot of people coming to this place from other parts of Arabia, parts of Africa. And the Arabs, this time is called the days of Jahiliyyah, right? The days of ignorance, right? Because of that. But I think we have to also remember that these Arabs that are living there, they also had good qualities, right? They had, like, honor was a big thing to them. So this custom of, there was a story about one of the Arab chieftains. I think he was at war with this other chieftain. And at some point he got lost or something, and he came into the tent of his enemy, right? But the enemy was bound to keep him, give him hospitality for 3 days. And then he would have to let him leave, and then he could go back, and then they could start their war again. But they had these concepts of honor, which I think were very good. And then poetry, what we talked about earlier, they were very good in language. They had a lot of beauty in their language. Now, this picture I have, my brother found it. It's a movie that that was recently made. It's about this guy, Imrul Qais. Now, Imrul Qais, the reason I bring him up is he's born in pre-Prophet Muhammad. Now, he's not a Hanif, okay? He's not one of these people who's a monotheist. But it's interesting because if you read about his life, you kind of see how the Arabs are. Now, the 2 things he's always talking about are women and drinking, right? That's what he's really, really into. And he talks about his warring and his drinking. And so there's this one thing where I think somebody kills his father, and he didn't even know who his father was, but he talks about how he's honor bound to go now kill all of the enemies, right? And he talks about, what does he say here? So he says, alcohol is forbidden for me, and so are women, until I kill from the Bani Asad, which is the tribe that killed his father, 100, and I cut the foreheads of 100. So understand, this is how these people are. This is their honor system, right? He's talking about killing hundreds of people. And then he says, my father let me get away when I was young and made me carry the burden of revenge for his blood when I was older. No sobriety today and no intoxication tomorrow. Today shall be drink and tomorrow shall be a great matter. And then the story goes, and then he got drunk. Okay. Is to give you an idea of how these people were. But he's now one thing I do want to mention is he has a lot of poetry. Ibn al-Qais's poetry is very famous. Why is it important to study his poetry? Because Islamic scholars are really, really into his poetry, though it talks about all these negative things. Why would that be an important thing?
During the time of the revelation of the Quran, it was done in like a poetic, poetic way. So this kind of shows you what was the norm for the people who were very talented, and the individuals who were reading this, they felt like he was very noteworthy to read. So now they're probably comparing it to the Quran as well, because some of the ways that people illustrated their poetry, and then the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the Quran, they're probably comparing the two. That's what my theory is.
Any other thoughts?
So that's right. So part of it is that the Quran is being revealed in a poetic way, right? And so you have an understanding of how poetry was done amongst the Arabs beforehand, right? What's more important for these scholars is they're trying to understand what words mean, because the Quran, right? God says in the Quran, this is a Qur'anan Arabiyan. It is an Arabic Quran. So he's signaling that, now what is Arabic? It's a language. It has rules, it has syntax. The words mean something, there's vocabulary. God's revealing his message in a thing that's already exists amongst humans, right? So what Imr al-Qais is saying in his poetry a lot of times informs us what the Quran means. And I was talking to my brother about this. Just if you take English, for example, if you ask me, do you want to go to lunch? And I say, I'm up for it. Now, a non-English speaker may not understand that, right? But if I say I'm up for it, what does that mean? Okay. Now you call me again, are you still want to go? And I say, I'm down. What does that mean? How does that make any sense, right? I said I'm up for it, and then I said I'm down, and both of them mean I'm willing to go. So imagine if there was a revelation in modern English, and if these types of things were used, you would have to know what their usage was. So I'd mentioned in one hadith, Hadith Aisha, radiallahu anha, his wife, she said that in Ramadan, the Prophet would tighten his belt. Right? So if you're reading that without understanding the actual Arabic, you wouldn't understand what that means. You would literally think maybe it's sunnah to go tighten my belt or something, right? But it meant that he would work extra hard, right? Like in the English version I had mentioned earlier was, we're going to roll up our sleeves and work hard today. You don't actually roll up your sleeves. It's an idiom. And so Imr al-Qais's poetry, but even the words that he uses are extremely important, because how he used them, what he said, and it's not just limited to Imr al-Qais, it's limited to other poets and other people who were talking about. So they may be talking about, you know, some girl they lost and they loved her and she slept with somebody else, and all this crazy stuff. But these Islamic scholars are like poring over this, trying to understand how the words were used back then. Does that make sense? Now, the other picture I have here is a Roman emperor, Marcus Julius Philippus. I think he was Roman emperor. I'm not sure if he was a governor. I think he was actually the Roman emperor. I have here, the note says 244 to 249. So a very 5-year period. Marcus Julius Philippus, his other name was Philip the Arab. All right. Now, the Arabs were all in the Levant and Iraq area. So I had his picture here because it signals who else was out there. Right north of them was the powerful Roman Empire, right? The remnants of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire still exists. It's very powerful. Constantinople is their capital. On the northeast are the Persians. They're very powerful, and they also control Yemen. Okay, so he and the Muslim community are going to come in contact with these other groups of people. The Jews and Christians. So that's important because the prophet is bringing his message. And actually, there was an interesting question I got from one of the brothers here that the Christians were asking. There's this common concept that Muhammad, and I think this is actually logical for Christians to have this, that Muhammad copied the Bible, right? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam copied the Torah and the Bible. And I mean, that would be natural if you don't accept him. It'd be natural to think that he got these stories from the Bible and the Torah. And I was really thinking about this, but that is the Christians. The Christians were not in Arabia en masse. The Christians were. You had to go up to Syria, or you had to go up to maybe Iraq, northern Iraq, to actually come to meet Christians, right? And what kind of Christians there were, I'm not sure. I'm sure it was some sort of Orthodox Christianity that existed there, the Coptics, for example, in Egypt. And then there were Zoroastrians. That's what the Persians were, Zoroastrians. And there was a Jewish presence in the Arabian Peninsula, right? The diaspora. So you had Jews in Medina, for example. They existed there. They weren't really in Mecca, but there was a sizable population in Medina. So when the prophet goes there, there's going to be dealings with these people, because the prophet we consider them people of the book, right? And so they are believers in previous prophets, and they have remnants of the books that we believe in. So that's an important thing to understand, is that you have these pagan Meccans you're dealing with, but then you also have these Christians and Jews who exist also very close. We talked about the Persians and the Romans. Now, his clan, it's important to understand, I think, even from perspective of what he's going to face. We'll get into his lineage on the next slide, but let's go to the next slide real quick. I want to show the lineage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's very short ancestry compared to the ones in the Bible, right? We have, like, in the Bible, I think it goes on and on and on through all of the fathers. But this is the general concept of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's lineage. So it's coming from Adam. That should be Nuh, Nuh. Yes, the Paula's comment is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam traveled a lot to Syria before being a prophet, since he was a businessman, though. That's correct. So we'll get into that his in the next part, which is his upbringing. Is you see that he does go and travel to Syria and different places, because the tribe that he's part of is they're merchant class, and they are, they take caravans to different places and trade. That's their primary purpose. And we'll get into that a little bit. And if you have a follow-up, Paula, please do chime in. But here we see from Adam to Noah to Abraham. Now, Abraham, it splits, right? Isaac and Ishmael, Ishaq and Ismail. And so Ishaq alayhi salam, so all of the messengers, not all of them, but many of the messengers, the Israelite messengers that are coming, Solomon, David, Aaron, all of them are from the line of Isaac, right? Joseph, Zechariah, John the Baptist, all of them are coming from that line, right? The Banu Israel, Musa, Isa. After Isa, after Christ, it stops, that line ends, right? And then through this Ismail, there's no prophets in that line at all, at least that we know of, right? And then it's Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the lineage that he's coming through. So the Quraysh, so his larger tribe in Mecca, right? So in Mecca, you have elite Arabs, you have poor Arabs, and then you have outside of Mecca the rural Arabs. And then outside of that, you have these Bedouins. So he makes up the top class of Mecca. Okay, the Quraysh are considered like the top, but they also are proud of the fact that they're from Ismail. They're proud of this fact that we are, so they actually had, I forgot what the concept was, but they had this concept that they weren't full Arabs. They weren't full-blooded Arabs, because for them, full-blooded Arabs came from Yemen. They came from the south. So they had this concept that we married into the Arabs, and we still have this noble lineage of Abraham and Ismail. Does that make sense? And so within the Quraysh, you have many clans. And he is part of the Banu Hashim, which I have on this slide. Okay, so even now you'll see people have the last name Hashmi. they'll have their last name Qureshi, right? It's all from these concepts. And, let's go back to the previous slide.
It's 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Yeah, we'll end with that slide. Inshallah, we can move on. So it's important to understand the lineage as far as he's coming from Adam through Abraham, through Ismail, alayhi salam. And then his clan is the Quraysh. They're the larger ones. And the Quraysh, again, they're the custodians of the Kaaba. They're the custodians of all the idols, right? His particular tribe is the Banu Hashim, the children of Hashim, the Hashmites. Like the ruling class in Jordan today, right? They're called the Hashmites. And so they still believe they're a direct lineal descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's important to understand about the Banu Hashim is his grandfather, the Prophet's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Now he's mentioned in the book, in the Muslim guide. Abdul Muttalib is a very formidable figure. He was the de facto leader of Mecca. He had lots of sons, very powerful man. So that's who the Prophet ﷺ is going to be born into. Now, the concept of this noble family, what I wanted to mention about that is that all of the prophets are born into the highest class of a society. And, there may be various reasons for that. One of the reasons also is that the Banu Hashim are going to be instrumental in protecting him. It's a clan society, right? So if you step out of line, right, there are consequences. But if you're part of a tribe, if you're part of a clan that's powerful, you mess with the entire clan, right? So they provide your safety. So we'll see how that affects the Prophet ﷺ when he starts into his mission. Any questions before we end? And we'll take a 10-minute break, inshallah. Any questions or any comments? All right, let's take our break, inshallah.
Well, we have 10 minutes break. We resume at 11:20.
Okay, so on this slide, this is slide 7. I just wanted to, we already talked about the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but this Ziga root of Ur, my son was doing a project on ancient Sumeria, but I put this in because does anyone know where Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abraham was supposed to have been born and lived? Mecca is one.
Yes, in a city in eastern Turkey called Urfa.
So today it's Mesopotamia generally.
Yeah.
Eastern Turkey is what they mentioned, what I heard from online. So generally, I mean, people aren't sure exactly, but it's from Mesopotamia somewhere. And so I brought in this ziggurat because this is part of these temples that used to exist back then in ancient Sumeria. But that whole Eastern Turkey, modern day Iraq, all the way down to the Euphrates and the Tigris lands is probably where they think that Abraham came from. So somewhere in modern day Iraq, which would include Eastern Turkey as well, maybe some part of Western Iran. That's where he's coming from. And it's interesting with Abraham, it was a similar story if you read about him, being raised in this house of an idol maker and that sort of thing, and sort of trying to correct that belief. Let's go to the next slide. And I found this image on slide 8 of what Mecca might have looked at like at that time. And I heard from somewhere where they said the current mosque structure, the Grand Mosque, would cover the entire area. Like that's how massive it is now, and that's how small it was back then. What also, someone had mentioned this, and I thought it was a beautiful concept, is if you think about signs of God, right? If you think about the smallest thing we know of, like the atom, you have this singular nucleus, which electrons are flowing around. If you go to these largest things that we like, the galaxies, you have this black hole in the middle and this entire universe going around. And then you think of the Tawaf at Hajj, right? It's like this black cube in the middle and all these people circling around. It's kind of interesting if you think about that's why would God want that specific practice to happen. It's a sign of his, you know. It's kind of, it freaked me out a little bit when someone told me about like the black hole in the middle of the galaxy. I was like, oh my God, it's exactly like the Kaaba. So again, just look at the small, you know, this isn't Rome, this isn't Persepolis, it's not, you know, this massive, you know, Thebes or something. It's this tiny little city with a black cube in the middle where all this is going to sprout from, right? This massive, these civilizations that are going to come from. So just keep that in mind. One comment I saw online was lol, the name changed the drama. I guess it's funny. I just want to address that a little bit. Is, you know, I've heard this complaint from people who convert to Islam, is people are pushing them like, what's your new name? What's your new name, right? And sometimes it's people get bothered, sometimes people don't. Sometimes, so you have a variety of, I've seen a variety of reactions to that. Some people want to change their names very earnestly. Some people don't. They're like, I'm very happy with my name. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, there's a precedent for this where he did change names, but often because there was some problem with the name. Like there was one of his companions was named like Abdul Shams. Doesn't anyone know what that means? Abdul Shams?
Right? Up to like, I don't know.
Shams is the sun, but Abd is like, it's usually translated as slave of, servant of, right? So the Arabs would name themselves like Abd, you know, something. So Abd Shams, the Prophet would, and it's interesting, he wouldn't ever, in the hadith, when someone came up with the name Abd Shams, he would never say it's a bad name. It's interesting the way he would talk to them. He would say, I have a better name for you. And he would give him Abdul Rahman or something, right? And so what you see this is, I've seen it interesting because in most lands that Islam spread to that were non-Arab, they actually kept local names. So if you go to Iran, the Persian names stayed. They never went anywhere, right? Or you go to Turkey, their names stayed. I don't know how it is in Indonesia, but I think it's the same. You keep the names, they're local names. They're not necessarily Arabic names. But India, Pakistan, for some reason, everyone changes their name, or they have very Arabic Persian names. You have a question?
I have a question in regards to that. I was Christian before receiving Mashahad. When I did, I have a Muslim sister that she's kind of kept me under her wing. And she asked me what my new Muslim name was. And I said, I don't know. So she gave me the name of Amina. But how would I go to implementing that new name? And is it legit that she was the one that gave me the name?
Do you know what it means? Because everything has a meaning.
Well, my husband said it was Prophet Muhammad's mother's name, and it means honest and loyal.
That's beautiful.
That's the name that she gave me. So,
It's entirely, it's your choice in that way, because I think if you're, I don't think there's any bad meaning to that name. Most Christian names don't have any bad meanings, you know.
the word Cindy is short for Cynthia, and Cynthia is goddess of the moon.
Oh.
So in my that's what Cynthia means, and in my culture, my Hispanic culture, Cynthia is goddess of the moon, but in America they call us Cindy, but my birth name is Cindy.
So I'll just tell you, so I don't think I'm qualified to answer what's right or wrong. I'll tell you what I've seen and what I know of. So often what will happen is, like my friend, so there's even this idea of American law, like how do you go to, your question was about implementing it. So there is a precedent. So again, the first thing is if your name, there's something wrong with the name. And I was mentioning that India, Pakistan, a lot of the names are associated with Hindu religion, with gods and that sort of thing. So people like to move that. The other thing I realized in India, Pakistan, is that the Hindu religion has that caste system, right? So people often don't want to be associated with a caste, and your name tells you what caste you are. So often they take the name, the caste, they take their Hindu name out and they want to be called Ahmed or Sayyid. Sayyid means you're from the Prophet's family. It's a people, there's a lot of Sayyids in India. That's okay. And so that's the first thing. Now, who gives you the name? Often it will be a scholar or be a person that's close to you, but it's entirely up to you if you like the name or not, right? Or some people try to use like if my name was like, I don't know, like Michael, I may take Mikhail or something, you know, like a similar name. I've seen people do that. Or it could be like, if you respect this person, you want to keep that name, you can keep Amina. It's a beautiful name, right? But it's entirely up to you. Now, my friend was named Mark. Now, he was telling me it's a Roman name, there's nothing bad about it. And so he never legally changed his name. He took the name Abdul Malik, right? He just liked the name. He found someone that he respected that was named Abdul Malik. And so he himself said, my name is now Abdul Malik. Now, he never went legally to change it. His name is still Mark legally. So that's another thing. Your name could remain Cynthia and your last name, right? Now, you'd have to go to the court to actually get it changed. Most Muslims I've seen, they keep their names, but they present themselves as whatever their new name is. So I think the name change thing gets a bad rap in the sense that it's an optional thing. If you want to change your name, like I said, TJ Winter, that's his name. But his sheikh, I think his scholar, the scholar that he was with, he had a bond with, gave him the name Abdul Hakim Murad. Now, Hakim means the wise one, you know, and his scholar gave him that. And that was a very it's an honor for him to have that name. Or Malcolm X, I mean, that's a whole other, you know, you wanted to put the X for a particular reason, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. And so the African-American community, for example, has a very particular reason for maybe changing their names. They don't want to be associated with these Anglican names or these English names, right? So I think it's entirely up to you how you want to approach that. I do think, I personally don't like the practice of asking someone, what is your new name? It's like, if you want to change your name, you can change your name. If you want to be called something else by Muslims, you can do that. If you want to keep your name, if it has nothing bad associated with it. Like, even there are names like Cynthia, for example. I don't know the history of it, but it could be possible that it was once associated with that, the goddess of the moon, and maybe it was Christianized at some point. That's also possible. I don't know anything about it, but I know that sometimes names go through these various changes and they may mean something at one time and they may mean something different. So like in our family, my son is named Ziad, right? But that was because a scholar in the city gave him that name. So his full name, Abdurrahman Ziad, is what I like, you know. Another scholar gave my daughter's name, Iman, right? Murad, my father liked it and we kind of picked it, and that was it. Now, those names are all Arabic. They're not local to my culture, but that's because I like it. But it's entirely up to you how you want to keep it. I mean, there are beautiful names that are not Arabic that are from different cultures that have nice meanings. You can take those. I mean, like, yeah, go ahead.
It's just that coming from very similar but different religions, and I know some of Islam because of my husband, whatever he's been implementing and teaching me. But now that I received my Shahad, I want to get more intense in learning Islam. And when she approached me and she asked me that, I was like, I don't know. So that's the reason why I was asking. I said, okay, so is this common? Is this because of and she is very close to me. So that's why.
I would say it was common before, but I think it is this concept of people bringing some of that. I think conversions are less, I shouldn't say less common. I don't know that, but in the US, it is very common for especially immigrant communities to ask new Muslims, like, what's your new name? I don't think that's a practice that is necessarily part of, that's required at all. I know that for sure. It's entirely what you feel comfortable with. Often what I've seen is even amongst like the certain the Nigerian community, they'll give you an Arabic name. I knew a brother named Musaddiq. It's an Arabic name. but he had his own Yoruba name, like his own tribal name. He has his own name. I've seen that a lot. A lot of Muslim people have that. Like even some of the rulers in India, they were Turkic. There were these Turks coming in from the north. So they had names, like someone would be named like Khairuddin, like the good of the religion. They couldn't even pronounce those names because they're coming from a different culture. So he's known as Babur. He's the first ruler in India. But I forgot what his Arabic name was, but his scholar gave him the name, but no one used it because they couldn't even pronounce it. So I think it's like an honorific sometimes, but the practice is so varied. It's entirely up to you. And I think if you feel any sort of hesitation, I think go with what, you know, whatever you decide yourself, you know, is the best. Any other questions on the names?
Something of the sort that you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to give your child a bad name. So as long as the name doesn't have any, my understanding is as long as this name doesn't mean anything bad, then it, by default, it's an Islamic name.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think so. Like Abdul Rahman, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Aziz, like those kind of names are, the Prophet said they were very beautiful. He would often name people that, or names of angels, for example. So those are, but you're absolutely right. I think as long as there's no meaning, I know there's a law. I don't know if it's still law in Texas, but there's a law you could not name your child Lucifer because someone tried that. They tried to name their kid Lucifer, which is the name of the devil. So yeah, something like that is not allowed in Islam. Like you could not name them Iblis. Like that would be really bad. You know, Iblis is the name for the devil. So yeah, other than that, I think the name is it's over. I think people put an overemphasis on it. It shouldn't be that emphasis. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. You've lived with a name your whole life. If it's a good name, keep it. It's not a problem. If you want to change it, you can. It's entirely, you know, up to you. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's open. I think people make this stuff a bit more difficult than it should be, right? I mean, yeah, you have autonomy.
I think it's really nice that she gave me that name, but it's just, the transition is just a little confusing, but it's nice to understand why they do it.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think we talked about in the earlier classes was very much this concept of when you become a new Muslim, it's like you have to have a lot of patience and go very slowly. And people are often rushing you not out of bad intent, but out of good intent. They want you to be a certain way, right? But it takes time. I mean, like I was mentioning a story where the scholars in Africa, this is very early on, where they would talk to a particular community or a village about the concept of God. Like one God, God is not a tree, God is not this, God is not that. And they'd leave that community to ponder that for like a year. Because belief is hard, and like turning your entire life, what you think, turning your entire life to something else is very difficult. It's impossible. And I'm going to say this has been my experience. This is not statistical at all, but often what I've seen, at least with younger men, they become Muslim. And then after a year, there's this like break that happens. They suddenly realize like, I got to go back to my old life. And it's not necessarily belief they're affected, but it's just like they're so used to like living a certain way that after a year, I've seen it around that time, they sort of switch back and you don't see them for a while. And then maybe you'll see them later, they come back to the religion, but it's very difficult. And I think taking your time very slowly into going through these things is what's super important. Because again, and this is part of the reason we're talking about the biography of the Prophet, is to show that he didn't suddenly just, everyone has to do XYZ. It was all very slow and methodical. And God was revealing these things over time, slowly. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is people jump into this, you know, I have to know everything within 3 months or something. It's just not a reality. You know, we've been doing this, like born Muslims have been doing this since we were kids, right? I mean, I have 3 children. They're all at different levels. Right, my 10-year-old has a lot more knowledge, but very little knowledge compared to like adults. But then the 5-year-old is dealing with different concepts. She's just now dealing with concept of God, and I don't even know if she really knows what the Prophet is. You know? The 3-year-old is just a mess, right? But be very careful about when people are telling you things. just be very careful about how you take that stuff, because people will tell you a lot of things that I think they mean good, but it can often be very overwhelming. And I think that's what you see with a lot of reverts / converts is it's very overwhelming, and it's so much stuff, so much information, so much to do. No, it's
For me, just the transition from always believing in Christ to now it's kind of like, wait a minute, hold back, and this is Prophet Muhammad, and then being introduced to it by one person, and that person trying to implement what his beliefs are, but then sometimes acting very different to what he's trying to implement me to follow. Kind of, it's a lot. So I had to kind of pull back and say, I'm just going to go to this class and sit there and then just take it from there. Because if I continue listening to other people, it kind of makes me not want to follow Islam. And that I don't want to deprive myself from being able to find what my heart really needs and desires because of that person. So I'd rather just step away, let go of that person, and then just come here where I can ask you and you can direct me in the right path instead of being misled or hearing so much from so many people.
For a couple of weeks that you talked about Islam as intended to be easy, not difficult. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about things like, the pronunciation is one of the things, during prayers is the intent to do it the best you can. And eventually you'll get there. But, people have told me your prayers can't be accepted unless it's 100% pronounced correct. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, your intent and you're working on it and so forth. So, but that's the thing that kind of got, one of the main things I've gotten out of this is Islam is not intended to be difficult.
So that's another issue with me. So before it was like, just pray to God and he accepts you as you are, humbled heart, as long as you repent, you're humble, and it gets accepted. But now, if you don't pray a certain way, you forget. So it's like, am I praying? And it's not being accepted. Am I not? Is God not looking upon me? And it's just sometimes it's overwhelming. And I met great people, and a lot of my new Muslim sisters, they all tell me it's just a lot of peace. It's just a lot of peace. But when this particular person is trying to implement it on me, it's not peace. It's just overwhelming and stressing, and it's just too much. So I'm so grateful that you all are offering this class, because I am really looking forward. I've been interested in looking into Islam, but before I didn't have anybody to kind of like direct me to where I can find it. I was just drive by and see, and just, I was so moved by, I lived in Garland and in Richmond, Richardson. It's a big Muslim community. And I was driving by a masjid. Now I know it's called a masjid. And I saw a lot of men just walking, like the street was just, the main street was just so full. They were crossing. I said, what is going on? In my religion and my culture, it's very hard to get a man to go to church. It's very hard. You invite them and they're like, no, next week. Next week, I'm tired. And that week never comes. But I just saw like a lot of men stopping whatever they were doing, their business, their life. It was completely stopped. And they were all walking together and going to the masjid. And now I know exactly what they were doing. And I think that is so beautiful. I saw a video of a gentleman that was praying in masjid, and he passed away in the masjid. So they said, you know what, he was giving himself to God. I'm going to cry. He's giving himself to God, and he just took him. Like, what else do you not want from life?
Yeah, subhanAllah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
And he receives that peace and he goes through that. I want some of that too. But it's just sad that some people, instead of guiding you to it, they hold you back from it.
Sorry, that is part of what the reality is here, where we spent an entire class talking about the stuff that Ricky was saying, that, you know, God wants ease for you, right? This religion is easy. I mean, it's in the Quran. Religion is an easy affair. Like, it's not, God does not want to make things difficult for you. Like, he talks about Ramadan and fasting, and then he says, but if you are sick, you know, don't. And then he says, this, God does not want difficulty for you. I mean, the thing is, there was a video that I sent out on WhatsApp. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was by one of the scholars, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, but he was saying that, you know, God is inviting you. He's inviting you to him, and people are pushing you away. They're trying to make things difficult for you and trying to make it hard. And I just, look, I'm not a revert or convert, but growing up, I felt the same obstacles. I was going to the mosque, and there was a group that kept telling me I had to go with them and, you know, go to other people's houses and try to bring them to Islam. And it's just like, I didn't want to go to the mosque anymore. I remember walking home, I'm like, I'm not going to go to that mosque. And then I was like, in my mind, I was like, you know what? If they are successful in pushing me out of the mosque, they win, you know? And for me, it was like, even us, even all of us, you take us away. It's just you and Allah. It's just you and God. That same concept you were talking about with Christianity, maybe that connection you had with something, right? With God. But my friend who was Christian, he said, I always used to pray to the Father. That was his kind of thing. He said, I always had that. And he said, it's no different now with Islam. I've accepted Muhammad as a prophet. Jesus is still there. But now it's the same concept that I had. That same prayers I used to do were going to the same God, right? And that's what it is. And I'm saying, ultimately, it's just you and him. None of us are even involved. But this class is, hopefully we get the correct understanding from the Prophet on what the religion was. Because as I mentioned, he hardly ever got mad at anything. But one time there was a companion of his who prayed extra long, and people started leaving the back because they're like, they couldn't stay. And he got so mad. He said, I'm trying to bring these people towards God, and you are trying to push them away. And this scholar, the video that I shared, he said that there will come a time, there was a saying, there will come a time when, I forgot the exact saying, but that they will prevent themselves from benefiting from the religion, and they will prevent others from benefiting from the religion, right? And it's this hardness that comes out where Islam just becomes a set of rules. That's all it is. It's just a set of rules, and they know the rules, and they want everyone to know the rules, and they want everyone to abide by the rules. And there's nothing about the heart in it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Muslims, I shouldn't say a lot, but some Muslims have become that way. And so they don't really think about God. They don't really think about these things in a deep way, right? They just do what they've been told, and they don't think about it. And I think that's very dangerous place to be, but especially if, like my sister was telling me that, you know, she will have issues where people will just say you're praying wrong. Now she knows how to pray, but people have this idea. They come and tell you you're praying wrong. You're not doing this right. You're not doing this right. And that's what the religion becomes. It's just constantly correcting people and telling other people, right?
Let me ask you this. If someone
Is watching someone else pray, this means that they are not praying. Like they're not concentrating on what they're doing. They're like being judgmental. Isn't that really contradictory to what prayer is for?
Yeah, I think someone asked, they were like, do you know how to practice that? Well, I used to dance. And when I dance, we would have a part of our dance routine where we stand in front of our coach and our teammates and we're critiqued. And so, you know, everybody knows you're going to get critiqued. It's okay. Don't feel bad. It's just to help you. And I was like, I've never prayed in front of someone and got critiqued about my prayer. You know, like I've never said, okay, you're doing step 2 wrong. Let's try that again. Make sure you put, you know, some more emphasis on this. You know, I've never gone through that. And so that was kind of like my mind was like, is this something I need to like go and be critiqued upon whenever I'm doing? So it was just, that's what it made me think of whenever someone asked me like, are you praying correctly? Like, I've never been critiqued on my prayer before, but
It goes back to their intentions. If they're trying to help you, maybe there's a gentle way of saying something, but
Exactly.
really, honestly, probably it's not, especially during prayer or like you shouldn't. I don't think it's right to go and tell somebody that, you know?
I experienced that myself before I received my shahad with my Muslim sister, but she is so nice. She is so sweet. I've never been treated so kindly by anybody like she does. If she'll see me praying, she'll just glance at me and she'll pick up my arms just a little bit, but she knows how to say it. And there's another person, a male, and he would get really upset. And I would tell him, no, this isn't the way we pray. You males pray very different. Females pray very different. And I've seen videos of how to pray, and my Muslim sister guides me, but she is so gentle and in showing me, and the male is just so hard on me. And it's just, and I said, you know what, this isn't the way. Yes, you stand like this, you do this. And it kind of breaks my heart. And then when I showed that male the video, he was like, oh, okay, yes, you guys pray differently.
How does he not know that if he's a Muslim?
I was like, come on. So
Well, it's slightly different.
it's slightly different.
Slightly.
A male's posture
The
is
posture
different
is-
to females.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the men's hands are a bit lower.
Yes.
So part of I was talking to somebody about this. This idea of when you get knowledge about the religion, right? But like number one, this is back up first. I mean, the way you do things in our religion, right? We believe there's a sacred reason for doing them, right? All of the prayers are based on the sun, whether it's rising, it's at its zenith, it's at its setting, the twilight's gone. All of these are meant to bring us back to that. The month of Rajab just began in our lunar month. It ties you to the moon. It ties you to the fact that the earth is revolving, that the moon is revolving around the earth, that the sun shines on the moon in a certain spot and you can see the new crescent, right? Wudu, the purification, ties you to these elements. You have water, you're washing yourself with it. If you can't find water, you use sand, you use the dirt, and then you ground yourself in the prayer. You put your forehead on the actual ground. These things have deep meanings in them, and that's why we try to do them the correct way, right? But to give you an example of how to correct somebody, the grandchildren of the Prophet, there's a story about, now their names are Hassan and Hussein, okay? They're his grandkids. I mean, he was leading prayer and they're jumping around on his back and stuff, I feel like if my son, 3-year-old, did that to me, people would start yelling at him at the mosque. I have a feeling like that. I mean, I don't know what they might say, like, oh, is our prayer valid? He would, if you laugh, if you break the prayer, you stop, you tell them, you start again, it's not a big deal. And those two children, there's a story about how there was an old man that came in and was doing the purification, the wudu. They saw that he was doing it wrong. So what would they do, right? I mean, you think about how they would, these are the grandchildren of the Prophet. They've been around him, they see him. The elder one tells the younger one to do it wrong in front of him. And so the younger one does it wrong, and the older one starts to correct him loudly. So the old man could overhear, right? And he says, Hussein, that's not the way we do it. Hussein, do this, do this. And then the old man started listening and was like, oh, okay, like they're doing the wudu correctly. See, they didn't disrespect him because he's older. They were trying to inform him in the nice way. And so they didn't even talk to him, but they did this thing with each other where the man wouldn't lose his respect. Because you can imagine some young child telling you that you're doing something wrong. There's a beauty in the way the Prophet and did things, and that is Islam. These rules mean nothing if they're not done correctly. If they're not done for the right reason. Like, they mean nothing. Like, there's a verse in the Quran that says, when you sacrifice an animal, for example, at the Hajj time, God says the meat and the blood does not go to God. It's what's in your hearts that what goes to God. What does that tell you? Your bowing, your wudu, none of that means anything except what's in your heart. So this is what I tell the brothers here at the prayer. These are Muslims. They've been Muslims all their lives. Now they come in, they're doing their wudu. Sometimes I watch, when I'm doing my wudu, I see them, they're next to me, they're doing wudu. Splish splash, their feet, they throw a little bit of water on them and they go. Now, we can talk about validity, you can talk about whether it's correct or not, but I'm saying, if this was the only purification that counted, how well would you do it for God? That's the important question. So if I'm being very careful to wet everything correctly and do things with time, it's only because I want him to see that like I'm doing it for him and I'm doing it well. If you're praying and your mind's elsewhere, the Prophet said there are people that will come to him and 1/10 of their prayers will count. Why? Because what does God need from our prayers if we're not doing it for him? Right? I mean, when I was young, I was telling somebody that we used to have like the commercial break prayers, we'd be watching a TV show and the commercial break would come, we'd run and go pray and quickly come back, It's like, you look back on that, you're like, what is, does God need that? Does he, he's like the last thing we care about. But so I would try to distance yourself, if possible, from anyone that takes a role like that. Because when I was saying about the knowledge part of it, when you have a little bit of knowledge, I feel you become very dangerous because you become like the people who are like, I haven't heard of that. And I really dislike that when people say that. I haven't heard of that. It's like, well, does your knowledge encompass so much that you should have heard something like this? Because I hear that from a lot of people. You mention a hadith or something, or you mention a saying like, I haven't heard of that. Well, unless you're like the great jurist of our time, like maybe you shouldn't be saying that because the great scholars don't say that. I've never heard the scholars who really know ever say, I haven't heard of that. They can ask you like, oh, they get interested, they're curious, like, wow, I haven't heard that before. Where's that from? That's interesting. But you get a little bit of knowledge makes you dangerous because then you have enough knowledge to start telling people they're wrong. Now the prayers, for example, right? Do men and women pray alike? We covered a little bit about this in the previous class. I'm saying the Sunni Islam, like the way you pray, there's a variety of ways. They're all based on the same evidence, right? If you go to the mosque, we're going to pray Dhuhr, at 12:45. You have 5 people praying. You'll probably find 5 different prayers. Are they praying wrong? No. There's a variety of schools of thought on how the Prophet prayed. And this idea that there should be only one is a very modern phenomenon that didn't exist before, ever. It never was the case. You go to India, you go to Africa, you go to Turkey, you go to Indonesia, you find people praying different ways. Generally, if they're in the same area, they'll pray a similar way. But no one would ever say, this is incorrect. You only say that if you don't know. So I used to tell my mom when I was growing up that she was praying wrong. Think about that. A 14, 15-year-old telling his mother, like, you're not praying like the Prophet. Why was I saying that? Because I was told by somebody. Now, was she praying wrong? No. I was wrong. I just didn't know enough. But I was very happy to go around correcting people and telling everyone because you get this feeling of like, I understand. That's very dangerous because you can drive people away from Islam. You can drive people away from God. It's supposed to be easy. The sheikh, the scholar that I followed, someone asked him to tell us about the prayer. I was shocked at the way he introduced it. He said, when you say Allahu Akbar, this is what he said. He's like, Allahu Akbar like this, or like this, or like this. And every part of the prayer, he gave you like 3-4 different things.
There are only a few things that are actually like you can't just go like peck at the ground. You should stay there for a while. You should stay there where you are at each station. That might make your prayer like repeating like this, or like this, or like this, or like, for women.
I guess what I was trying to say is that one way, it's not like this has to be, it's like this way, but I'm just saying is that like, what I'm trying to say is that there's emotions that it's like, isn't it like I think that showed Muhammad how to pray. It's like, I know, because you know, I grew up in Indonesia and I see one thing, and then I went to here, and then I saw, you know, people from different culture do it differently. And I to myself saying, like, is that right? And so I talked to my mom, who, I mean, she has a lot more knowledge of the culture and whatnot. And she just say that, you know, different people from different country might do it differently than you are, but doesn't mean, like, you know, certain things that needs to be done in the prayer is different. I mean, you know, it's not done. It's there. I just haven't seen it that way. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like the one way in a sense of, like, has to be certain motion that it needs to be, you know, needs to be done. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily like, you know, this way, like, exactly, you know, this way, but, you know, like, but that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to, you know, oh, I think it's one. The reason why I say one way is that, you know, it's that kind of part of it. The majority needs to be done in a certain way. So yeah, I don't know if it makes sense. But yeah.
I was gonna say that even in recitation of Quran, right? There are different styles of recitation as well. So across all boards, everything's just a little different.
I saw a video before where there was a demonstration of prayer, and the individuals' arms were down the entire time. And I was told that during a period of time, like individuals who were praying, who were practicing Islam, they would actually get beaten, like, on their arms, like, really, really bad, to the point where they couldn't lift their arms up. And so that style of prayer was developed because their leader arms was like they weren't able to lift it up. And so that's why their arms stayed down. And so some people still practice that form of prayer, but, like, sometimes we don't know why. Like, why do people do it this way? Maybe there was someone who was teaching them who had a disability, and they could not lift their arms up, or they couldn't do something the proper way that we can. And then we also have to understand that people do have disabilities. So they may not be able to get on the ground the way you are able to. They may not be able to actually hit every single point, but that doesn't invalidate their prayer, because only God knows, you know, what their intention is and how well they're trying to do it. So being mindful that maybe you have an ability that another person doesn't have, but, you know, God is just, and he's going to judge us based off of what we're able to do. But one of the things that I didn't know for a while was just, like, the gaps and, like, the lines, and how, like, whenever we're praying, how we're supposed to fill up the gaps and stay in line. I think that was something that I feel like is more important than just, like, do you hit every single point in the prayer? But that's just my own person.
No,
It's a go. He's telling, like, I'm great. I didn't cover a lot of what I
no, I'm gonna be here every week, always. So I'm gonna keep teaching whatever, you know, but these are the things that I really like to hear, just because I think these are the things that are more real. Because for me is, look, we can talk about the law. Okay. When you grew up in Indonesia with the Shafi fiqh, all right, it's the Shafi school of thought. All right. The Hanafi school is what we grew up with in India, Pakistan. In Africa, if you go, there's the Maliki school. In Egypt, for example, they pray with their arms down. That explanation you gave, they would be offended by that we're following people who were hurt. And, you know, just to let you know, they believe that the Prophet prayed like that. That's their belief, the Malikis. And then there's the Hanbalis. They're there's 4 different versions. Now, this is all advanced things that we can learn. You can talk about different things. Like, I'm learning Shafi fiqh in detail about what's required. Like in the wudu, you do this 3 times, that 3 times. I mean, I told my son, he was, you know, he's still, prayer's not incumbent upon him. He's only 10, but he was getting up for Fajr. He didn't want to pray. He was like, oh, I'm tired. He said, do I have to do the full wudu? I said, look, do your arms, do your face, do your hair, and do your feet. You're done. Just once each. That's the minimum required. Okay, he's a kid. So he was like, oh, okay, you know, I can do that. God doesn't work on the level of humans. Humans work on validity and this rule and that rule. And was this prayer actually, like, you know, now, if you've been Muslim 40 years and you've never bothered to figure out if you're doing your purification correctly or your prayer correctly, you're going to be judged very differently than someone who's been Muslim for like 6 months and is trying their hardest and they're missing things. God doesn't work at the level of, oh, not valid, too bad. He's not working at that level. Humans work at that level. And I would say non-merciful humans work at that level, right? That's not what this is about. It's about what you can do. It's what what the sister was saying right now is what it really comes down to is, what are you able to do? Okay? You cannot pronounce things correctly and you're trying. There's not a single scholar on earth that will say that God's going to reject that. It's not going to happen. It's not our religion. If you believe that, you should leave Islam. Like, that's not the religion that this is. It's not the religion that I signed up to follow. Right? That's not the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is someone, I mean, there's an entire community in America that prayed only in English. The Waridin community, an African American community, they only prayed in English. I mean, now they changed. Now they're slowly doing the Arabic. Did God nullify all of their prayers? Is that really what God is like? Is that what it's impossible, because that's not what the Prophet was like. So I'm saying that's not what the religion is. And that's what it makes me a bit angry when you see Muslims come with this view, and then they hurt their children. I feel like I'm gonna cry, because like I see these kids growing up with this like demonic style of religion, where it's like, you will go to hell if you do this, and God's not accepting this. It's like, you're not the spokesman for Allah. You're not the spokesman for the Prophet, because this religion is ease and it's mercy. That's what this religion is. And you go to the great scholars anywhere. I'm not talking about I've been influenced by the West, but I'm American. You go to the great scholars around the world, that's what you see. You see mercy, you see peace, you see genuineness. That's what the religion is. That's what you see. And it's I think there are people that come at you with validity and all this stuff, especially when you're new Muslim. It's just crazy to me. It's absolutely crazy. Because that's the best way to push someone away from the religion and away from Allah. You know? And I mean, I've seen this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's not just for a new Muslim. For an old Muslim, for somebody to tell me that, I just also kind of like, hey, hold up, like, so I have to think, in a sense, because I've been corrected too, because again, like from Indonesia, when I go to mass, I'm not necessarily how to wear, you have to wear like, modesty, but covering. So you're gonna cover your shop anyways. But whenever I come here, I guess it's different culture, whatnot. I did get examined. Cover your head, sister. I was like, seriously, like, why are you telling me this? Things like that. I do get offended when trying to say that like this. Even me as a born Muslim, if somebody say that.
But it does make a big difference, and thank you. One thing you just said that you correct with kindness and love. And now I know that my prayers are still being accepted. But it's just very hard when you have someone trying to correct you and condemns you all the time. That is just very hurtful. And a sister online, she wrote the 1 and 2. She said, they don't know, weren't exposed. That's me. Like, I don't know any better. I'm learning. And number 2, somehow had to know, and they're going to be held accountable. And it's like you're condemning yourself by trying to condemn me, and I don't know. So that's the only thing that's hard. And to me, and I understand what you said. There's points when you pray, your face has to touch the floor. If and when I know exactly how to pray, I will definitely pray the way, because I am submitted myself to Allah 100%, and I want to pray to Him and worship Him the way it's supposed to. But in the process, if I'm just learning, I shouldn't be condemned or making, I don't know, just being hurt by not knowing at this time. But when I do know, I'm going to be 100% devoted the way it should be.
Some people know and they still forget though. Like that's the thing. It's possible that you may know and some people just forget because that's how Allah created us. We're created very weak. So even though you have learned things, sometimes you have to constantly go through things and then you still won't remember to do it correctly.
Yeah, I think the key is just to concentrate on what you can do. And I honestly, my personal view is it would be more detrimental. It would be worse that you try to do everything quickly, like try to learn everything, then go slow at a slower pace. Because I think in the long run, it will hurt you. God forbid. I mean, hopefully it does not. But if you try to do, try to separate yourself from people who are constantly on your case. But I almost feel like, with my sister, for example, and my mother and like the other people in my family, it's like part of the reason I'm telling you like that I started to learn about the religion was because I was getting told so many different things. And I was tired of it. I literally was tired of it. I was like, I'm going to learn this for myself. And at the beginning it was like, I'm going to tell all these people, and you're not supposed to do that either, right? But I think you should, I don't know if this is even possible, but for my family, it's like you have to have a certain level of confidence to say like, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate your advice. Thank you so much. I'm good. And then do what you have mapped out for yourself, right? Have a little bit of confidence that these people may know more, but they may not. And their knowledge may be dangerous. That's what I've seen a lot. There's knowledge that is dangerous because it's a little bit of knowledge and you don't know that much and you start telling people things that are wrong. That's what's dangerous. You're communicating things that are false, that the religion is like this. If you don't renounce this, your prayers aren't going to count. That is wrong. You should not be telling other people that. Like that is not a correct statement to make, especially someone that is never recited Arabic in their life, that is, that wasn't raised with this stuff. I mean, my tongue was raised with Arabic, even though I'm not Arab. I mean, it was when we were young, we were taught this stuff. We had to finish the Quran. I mean, all these brothers are probably the same thing, right? I mean, you were taught the Quran when you were young, how to pronounce it. So really, I think try to get some of that just to go at your own pace, because learning all this stuff, even I'm saying if the validity of the prayer counts on your head touching the ground and you haven't been doing that for like months, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what Allah Ta'ala is looking at, what God's looking at is your effort and your ability. And he's not expecting you to learn things within a matter of like 3 months, everything what people have been learning over 10 years. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So I don't understand with new Muslims, it's just a very harsh world. It's like you're thrown into this gauntlet, like go, It's not supposed to be like that. It's just, I mean, saying the way I'm trying to bring my son, it's especially with everything around us. Do I want to beat him into submission and like, this is what you must do? He's not going to stay. He's not going to stay Muslim. It's just not going to happen.
Too, and what helps maybe stay more grounded is the fact that even as Muslim converts, like our prayers, even if whether we're doing them right or not, we're rewarded even more just because it's the initial acceptance into the faith.
And that's what I was thinking. You remind me what I was going to say, that there's actually a hadith that for the person that recites the Quran with difficulty and they stop and they can't pronounce and they're trying, they get double the reward. And for converts, everything you actually do is doubled. And every effort you make is doubled compared to us. Because like we were put into a family that raised us with the Quran and raised us with the Prophet ﷺ. We knew him when we were kids. You guys don't have that. Everything's doubled. So just really, I think if this class could be one thing, it would be don't overwhelm yourself, take it slowly, and be patient with things. And ultimately, the relationship that you have is with you and God. These people aren't part of it, right? I mean, they can try to help you, they can be nice, this and that, but my relationship is with Allah, like by myself. When I'm at night, when I'm praying to him, I don't know if I'm doing it right. I've been studying for so much and I still do things wrong. I still find out that I was doing this incorrectly or that incorrectly. I mean, do I think my prayers, none of them counted? Like, no. It's just not how he is. It's just not what this religion's about. And that's part of what, when we talk a little bit about Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, that's part of what he's all about, is he's coming to these people whose hearts are dead, who are all about the law. They're all about the temple and this and that. And he's inviting them to something else. He's inviting them to look at their hearts and to say this religion is more than your laws. It's more than these rules, right? And they tried to kill him for that. They didn't want any of that. They weren't having that. They're like, that you're talking against the law. And why are these stories in the Quran? Why is God telling us about Isa, about Jesus? Why is he telling us about Moses and the problems that he had? Part of it is to instruct the prophet, right? So like with the story of Joseph, right? At the end, he forgives his brothers, right? For all the stuff that they did to him. That's what the prophet did at Mecca. We'll learn about that. He literally said the word that Joseph said to his brothers. This day, everything is forgiven. You're good, you know? So part of it is instruction for him. What did Jesus go through? What did John the Baptist go through? What did Jonah go through? He's instructing the prophet, but it's also for us. This is how people become, right? Their hearts become hard because it becomes about the law. It's all about the law. And so the scholar that I used to really, really look up to, my sheikh, he used to say that I don't like talking about Islam. I like talking about Allah. And I was like, what's the difference? And he's like, Islam's a system of rules and laws. God is Allah. And there's too much discussion about Islam and not enough discussion about Allah. I thought that was very interesting, that God is ultimately the object of everything. And you can lose yourself in the laws by just talking about valid, invalid, this and that, because God doesn't work at that level. He's working at what's in your heart. No one can see what's in your heart, right? These people who are correcting you, they can't see what's in your heart. They don't know what God's accepting or what he's not accepting. They don't have power over that. I mean, that's a good feeling. It's a humbling feeling that God alone knows what's accepted or what's not accepted. Did you have a...
I was just thinking about, like in school, we have good professors, not good professors, but we have those professors who are very lenient, who give us all the bonus points, make up assignments, opportunities to improve our grades. And then we have some of those professors who are very like, okay, you made this on this exam, that's what you get. And, I think about that, and I think about how God or Allah is like the bonus points. Here, you can make this up. You have all these extra opportunities. And then, man, we are like, you made what you made. It is what it is. You're done with. And so we have a merciful God. I mean, he starts every single surah with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which is the most merciful. So he's always given us an opportunity, and he's very, very just. And even I remember reading that we won't, if we do get an opportunity to go to Jannah, it's not by our deeds alone, it's by his mercy. And so all of those things are how we have to look at dealing with each other, being merciful, because we tend to stick with just the rules and lack of mercy.
I know
very interesting discussion. It's already 12:18.
Yeah.
I really do not want to stop. Honestly, I don't want to stop, but I have to be reminded
stop,
about the time as well. Inshallah, there is a lunch where Brother Ren.
Yeah. Well, so I'm just going to mention two things, and we'll end over here at the Prophet's. We're going to talk next time about his life and upbringing. Just two things I wanted to mention. One of the classes, I think it was last class, maybe we talked about this man that killed like 99 people, right? And the Prophet mentioned this man killed 99 people. And then he's asking for redemption. He's asking people, is there repentance for me? And he goes to this person that says, no, there's not. Kills him too. So now he's killed 100 people. And he goes to another man, and the man says, of course there's repentance for you, but you need to go to this other town and leave this wicked place. And he's walking there, and he dies in the middle. And so ultimately in the hadith, God says, measure the land, right? Like measure the land. If he's closer to the place he was going to, forgiveness. If he's not, hellfire. And he was closer by a handspan to the place he was going. And the hadith says that God himself stretched out the land so the man could be forgiven. I'm saying, do you think he's going to fault you for a missed thing in your prayer if he's forgiving a serial killer, essentially, who's trying to be good? And lastly, just the intention, remember, I mean, this is a God that says, if you intend a good deed and you do it, you get 2 rewards. If you intend a good deed and you don't do it, you get a reward. If you intend a bad deed and you don't do it, you get a reward. So it goes with what everyone's saying, but I mean, that's what this religion is. And I mean, we have to end, inshallah. We'll begin with the Prophet's life next time, but let's get some lunch, inshallah. And thank you for the online folks for chiming in today. It was very helpful. If you have any other comments, please write them in and we'll look at them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over, inshallah. And we'll end with the surah, wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you so much, online participants and also the participants in the class. Inshallah, we'll have a lunch and then pray, and then also shall see you next week for the 7th session. And I'll post the recording. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.